بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. In the name of Allah, the most gracious and most merciful, we start the course inshallah on philosophy and Islam. And we ask Allah to teach us what benefit us and make us benefit from what He teaches us and increases our knowledge. So hopefully inshallah we'll finish probably before 6 if we are lucky. And I thought if we leave all the questions and comments to the end, because along the way the course will generate a huge amount of questions and comments, and that will make the course really unable to deliver. So if we just leave all the comments and questions to the end, and inshallah we'll address it one by one. The course is taken from Associate Professor Ruth Tallman, who is an associate professor in the department or the faculty of philosophy in Barry University in Miami, Florida, and delivered by Hank Green, who is part of the BPS digital studio. So what we will do, we'll show you a 8 minutes video on the topics which they talked about and has something to do with religion. The first 3 videos I was going to talk about what philosophy is and what you learn from philosophy and how they discuss issues. So we'll start with the first one inshallah, and you will see what
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace.
Does it sound
Share
okay
your
there?
passion with
The
the
sound.
world.
I'm Hank Green, and you and I are about to embark on a journey of inquiry into the whole world, your world, in an effort to figure out what gives it meaning, what makes it beautiful, where its evils come from, and ultimately what is the very nature of reality itself. And along the way, we're going to question every aspect of your own personal life. Why do you do what you do? Why do you think what you think? Why do you feel what you feel? Now, if you've joined me on Crash Course before, you might say, we've already learned all that stuff, like in psychology and biology and anatomy and physiology. And it's true, science can definitely help us understand our thoughts and feelings and actions. But on this particular journey, we're going to be exploring aspects of the human condition that can't be explained only by hormones or neurotransmitters, by personal experiences or hereditary conditions. Because all of those chemicals and experiences that make us who we are can actually raise as many questions as they answer. Like, if all of my decisions really are just a result of how I was raised and what chemicals I have flowing through my brain, then are any of my choices actually free? And if I'm not truly free to make my own decisions or choose my own actions, then how can I be held accountable for them? Yeah, it's gonna be that kind of journey. Rather than just looking at the world and describing what we see, we'll be evaluating it. We will take nothing as given, set our assumptions aside, or at least try really hard to, and do our best to see the world as if we've never seen it before. And for what it's worth, we'll also be talking about Batman and what Dick Grayson can teach us about the concept of identity. And we'll learn how the Matrix can help us understand the life and writing of Rene Descartes. Also, we'll try to answer unanswerable questions and puzzle over paradoxes that have plagued geniuses for thousands of years. It's gonna be hard and enlightening and frustrating, and if I do my job properly, it'll stick with you long after you and I have parted ways, because we are going to do philosophy. These days people use the word philosophy to describe some opinion they might have or an approach they have to a certain topic. Like, you might have a philosophy when it comes to golf, though I personally do not. But we are going to use this word more narrowly to describe a way of approaching the world that traces its roots back to ancient Greece, 500 years before the Common Era. This was a time of great intellectual movement around the world. Buddhism and Jainism were developing in Asia at the same time philosophical thought was emerging in Greece. There, scholars were tangled up in a distinction they were just beginning to make between philos and mythos, or what we'd now roughly call science and storytelling. At that time, there were bards like Homer who were trying to understand and explain the world through stories, while the earliest philosophers were using methods that were more analytical and scientific, although they didn't really have the concept of science back then. So philosophia, literally the love of wisdom, was a new way of trying to make sense of the world. When the earliest philosophers used the word philosophy, they basically meant the academic study of anything, which, like, I guess could include golf. But at what we might call the first universities in the Western Western world, Plato's Academy and its rival Aristotle's Lyceum, math, biology, physics, poetry, political science, and astronomy were all considered to be philosophy. Eventually, scholars began thinking of these fields differently, as separate disciplines. Studies that had strong empirical elements came to be considered science, a search for answers. But philosophy came to be understood more as a way of thinking about questions. Big questions. And today, 2,500 years after the ancient Greeks first brought them up, philosophers still love asking questions, oftentimes the same questions, and they don't mind that they never get an answer. So, what are these big questions that have managed to intrigue and stump philosophers for so long? One of the first might best be phrased as, what is the world like? Sounds simple enough to answer, right? Like, just look around and see all the stuff, well, this is what the world is like. But the philosophical approach isn't just based on observation. It has other, much more complex questions packed inside it. When a philosopher wonders what the world is like, she might really be asking, what's the nature of reality? Like, is the world just made up of matter and energy, or is there something else going on? And if it is just matter and energy, then where did it all come from? Is there a god? And if so, then what is he, or she, or it like? And for that matter, when you're asking about the world, can you also be asking about the nature of yourself as a citizen of the world? So, what kind of being am I? Do I have a soul? Is there something immaterial about me that will survive after I die? All of these questions are ways of exploring what philosophers call metaphysics, one of the three main branches of philosophy, an effort to understand the fundamental nature of the world, of the universe, and of being. Now, if those questions aren't heady enough for you, we, as students of philosophy, also have a whole separate set of questions that are about how we know the answers to any of this stuff. This particular strain of philosophy, which is like knowing about knowing, is epistemology, literally the study of knowledge, the second major field of philosophy. And it poses questions like, is the world really what I think it is? Like, really, is everything I see and think and experience, is it actually true? If it isn't, then what is true? And what's the best way to go about figuring out the truth? Is science the best way, or are there more ethereal paths to truth? Paths that science can never really travel? And let's say that after a lot of searching and question asking, I begin to develop some ideas, like an inkling about what might be true. Then, how do I know if I'm right? How will I ever know I'm wrong? Can I ever be certain about anything? Now, at this point, I wouldn't blame you if you're thinking, am I real? Do I know anything? Well, as questions go, these might not seem super practical, but there's another area of philosophy that helps frame your thinking around what you actually do, like how you should act and what you should attach meaning to. It's called value theory, and it's usually divided into two main branches. The first is ethics. You've heard of it. It's the thing that politicians are always said to lack and Jedi are supposed to have in great supply. Though, don't get me started on the prequels. In philosophy, though, ethics isn't just a code of what's right and what's wrong. It's the study of how humans should live with each other, rather than just sitting around and judging people. Ethics involves posing questions like, how should I live? Is there any reason that I should treat, say, strangers differently than the people I love? And for that matter, do I owe anything to myself? What about animals or the earth? And if I do have any of these obligations at all, where do they come from? Who says? Ultimately, whatever system you use to decide what's good or evil as human behavior goes is determined by your values. That's why ethics is considered part of value theory. But the other part of value theory isn't about what's right. It's about what's beautiful. Aesthetics is the study of beauty and art. Now, the concept of beauty is talked about practically everywhere, from the media to art school to barber college. But for philosophers, the pursuit of aesthetics involves considering what beauty is and whether it even exists. Aesthetics is a part of value theory because beauty and art are things we value and evaluate. And many people who study this particular kind of philosophy, known as aestheticians, believe there is such a thing as the beautiful. Something that doesn't just depend on what you happen to find attractive, but something that's just objectively true. And finally, there's one more aspect of philosophy that I should mention because it doesn't ask questions so much as help us find answers. Yes, finally, some answers. And that thing, which I happen to think can be beautiful in its own way, is logic. Logic is the philosopher's toolbox. It contains the saws and hammers, the microscopes and beakers that philosophers use to go about answering their questions in a clear, systematic way. Logic is about reasoning, giving strong arguments that don't fall victim to fallacies, which are, as you will learn, the mortal enemies of philosophical precision. Okay, so metaphysics, epistemology, value theory, they might all seem pretty airy and abstract, but don't worry because you have already done philosophy, even though you might not realize it. You do it in almost every aspect of your life. Every time you argue with your parents or wonder if you should date someone or decide to eat a salad instead of a ham and cheese Hot Pocket, you are doing philosophy because you're thinking about the world and your place in it. it, you're figuring out what you value, why you value it, and what you should do about it. So here's our plan. We're going to learn about the major fields of philosophy, posing questions and considering possible answers along the way, and each time we will use a two-step method. First, we'll really try to understand. You're not going to agree with all the ideas that I present to you, and I won't agree with them either. That's not the point. The point in step one is to really try to get inside of an idea, to understand it as charitably as possible. Then, in step two, you'll subject your understanding to some serious critical evaluation. Basically, you'll try to knock down what you think you know about a particular view of the world. And you'll do this whether you agree with the view or not. Why? Because only when you challenge your understanding of how some people view the world can you decide for yourself if theirs is a view worth having. Which leads me to my final point. Philosophy is not your usual field of study. I'm not going to be teaching you a body of knowledge where success means you know a bunch of stuff. Success in this course will mean that you know how to think. All we have are questions, and all you have is a brain. And the goal of philosophy is for you to use your brain to come up with the answers that make the most sense to you. You'll learn how to formulate arguments to support your ideas so you can explain why you think you're right, which, if you've ever been on the internet, you know is something that not a lot of people are good at. In order to do that, you're going to need to understand philosophical reasoning, the tools we use to investigate life's most perplexing questions, and that is where we're going to be headed the next time we meet. For now, you've learned about the historical origins of philosophy in ancient Greece and its three main divisions: metaphysics, epistemology, and value theory. We also talked about logic and how you're going to use it to understand and critically evaluate a whole host of different worldviews. Not about golf. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy is made possible by Squarespace. Squarespace is a way to create a website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features a user-friendly interface, custom templates, and 24/7 customer support. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com/crashcourse for a special offer. Crash Course Philosophy is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. You can head over to their channel to check out some amazing shows like The Good Stuff, PBS Spacetime, and Physics Girl. This episode of Crash Course was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course studio with the help of these amazing people, and our graphics team is Thought Cafe.
So basically, this is what we're talking about: inquiry of the word, your word, what it gives its meaning, what makes it beautiful, where evil comes from, and what's the nature of reality, and things which cannot be explained by your hormones changes, hereditary condition, or personal experiences. Also, we'll discuss on philosophy if my decision depends on how I was raised. Whether the way I was raised affected me or the chemical from my brain, and do I have a choice? Am I free? These sort of questions. Am I accountable? Why and why not? The science is just a strong experimental elements. Philosophy is a lot of thinking about the question. And he also mentioned the metaphysics, the nature of reality, epistemology, and which is the source and the scope of knowledge, and the value theory, ethics and aesthetics. Aesthetics we're not going to touch. Ethics we're going to touch by the end. We will start with the metaphysics and epistemology. And also, metaphysics is the nature of reality. What's the nature of reality? Is it just matter and energy? Where I came from? Is there a God? What he or she look like? And what's the nature of you? What kind of being you are? And do you have a soul or not? And these sort of questions. The epistemology is the knowledge. How do you get knowledge? How do you know it's the right knowledge? How do you get your belief and your faith? And are you asserted what you study? Do you have proof and evidence? And value theory, the ethics, talk about merciful and seaside, and how would you treat people who steal, and these sort of things. Aesthetics, which is the beauty and the value of beauty. The logic, which this is the end he was talking about, how you reason, and how you talk to people. You don't win an argument by shouting, by coming back again and again and again, by raising your voice. But you need to listen to his argument, bring your counter argument. He will bring counter argument, and this is the way you discuss issues. You get inside the idea, you subject your understanding to serious critical evaluation and to show how to think properly and to learn your philosophical reasoning. And that's, if we master the way you argue with people, it will be much easier when you talk about your belief, when you talk about your religion, when you talk about your way of life and things like this. The next video is going to talk about the logic, how you use the argument, how you argue your case.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
Aristotle once described humans as the rational animal. Well, actually, he said that man is the rational animal, but we don't have to be sexist just because he was. And if you've ever gotten into an argument with someone about religion or politics or which Hemsworth is the hottest, then you've experienced how irrational people can be about their opinions. So what Aristotle meant is that rationality is our distinguishing characteristic. It's what sets us apart from the beasts. And no matter how much you disagree with someone about God or Obama or Chris Hemsworth, you can at least grant that they are not beasts. Because, most of the time at least, people can be persuaded by arguments. You use arguments all the time. In the comments, at family dinners, with your friends. You probably just don't think of them the same way that philosophers do. When you try and convince your parents to loan you the car, or when you're talking up Crash Course to your friends, you are using arguments. Thanks, by the way. Each time you tell someone to do or believe something, or when you're explaining why you do or believe something, you are giving an argument. The problem is, the vast majority of people aren't really good at arguments. We tend to confuse making a good argument with, like, having witty comebacks or just making your points more loudly and angrily, instead of building a case on a solid foundation of logic, which can be harder than it sounds. But learning about arguments and strong reasoning will not only make you a better philosopher, it will also set you up to be a more persuasive person. Someone who people will listen to. Someone who's convincing. So yeah, these skills are beneficial no matter what you want to do with your life, so you might as well know how to argue properly. If you want to learn how to argue, then you should probably start around 2,400 years ago when Plato was laying out how reason can and should function in the human mind. He believed that we all have what he called a tripartite soul, what you might think of as yourself or your psyche, divided into three parts. First, there's the rational or logical part of the soul, which represents cool reason. This is the aspect of yourself that seeks the truth and is swayed by facts and arguments. When you decide to stop eating bacon for 2 meals a day because, as delicious as it is, it's bad for you, then you make that decision with the guidance of the rational part of your soul. But then there's the spirited aspect, often described as the emotional part of the self, although that doesn't really quite capture it. The spirited soul isn't just about feeling, it's also about how your feelings fuel your actions. It's the part that responds in righteous anger at injustice, the part that drives your ambition and calls upon you to protect others. It gives you a sense of honor and duty and is swayed by sympathy. So if you decide to stop eating bacon because you just finished reading Charlotte's Web and now you're in love with Wilbur, then you're being guided by the spirited part of your soul. But we share the next part of our soul with other animals, be they pig or moose or aardvark. The appetitive part is what drives you to eat, have sex, and protect yourself from danger. It is swayed by temptations that are carnal and visceral. So those times when you go ahead and just eat all the bacon because it just smells so dang good, the appetitive aspect of your soul is in control. Now, Plato believed that the best human beings, and I should point out here that Plato most definitely did believe that some people were better than others,
are always ruled by the rational part of their soul because it works to keep the spirited and the appetitive parts in check. People who allow themselves to be ruled by their spirited or appetitive selves are base, he believed, and not fully, properly human. Now, most of us don't buy into the concept of the tripartite soul anymore, or the idea that some humans are less human than others, but we do understand that we're all motivated by physical desires, emotional impulses, and rational arguments. And philosophers continue to agree with Plato that reason should be in the driver's seat. So how do you know if you're good at it? How can you test your reasoning? Well, let's head over to the thought bubble for some flash philosophy. Throughout this course, we're going to apply our philosophical skills by pondering puzzles, paradoxes, and thought experiments. Because remember, philosophers love thinking about questions, especially ones that don't have ready answers. So think of these exercises as philosophical wind sprints, quick tests of your mental abilities. And here's a doozy from 20th century British thinker Bertrand Russell, one of the pioneers of what's known as analytic philosophy. Say there's a town in which all men are
are required by law to be clean-shaven. This town has only one barber, a man who must follow strict rules. Rule number 1, he must shave all men who do not shave themselves. Rule number 2, he must not shave any man who does shave himself. It's the nightmare of every libertarian and every mustachioed hipster, but here's the question. Does the barber shave himself? Because think about it, the barber only shaves men who don't shave themselves, so if he does shave himself, then he must not, because the barber's not allowed to shave guys who shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he has to be shaved by the barber, because that's the law. Russell came up with this puzzle to illustrate the fact that a group must always be a member of itself. That means, in this case, that all men who shave themselves has to include every guy who shaves himself, including the barber. Otherwise, the logic that dictates the group's existence just doesn't hold up. And if the barber is a logical impossibility, then he can't exist, which means the reasoning behind his existence is inherently flawed. And philosophy doesn't tolerate flawed reasoning. So how do we make sure that we're ruled by good, sound, not flawed reason? By perfecting the art of the argument. An argument in philosophy isn't just a shouting match. Instead, philosophers maintain that your beliefs should always be backed up by reasons, which we call premises. Premises form the structure of your argument. They offer evidence for your belief, and you can have as many premises as you like as long as they support your conclusion, which is the thing that you actually believe. So let's dissect the anatomy of an argument. There are actually several different species of arguments. Probably the most familiar and the easiest to carry out is the deductive argument. The main rule of a deductive argument is if your premises are true, then your conclusion must be true. And knowing that something is actually true is very rare and awesome. So here's a boiled down version of a good deductive argument. Premise 1, all humans are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is human. Conclusion, Socrates is mortal. This kind of reasoning, where one fact leads to another, is called entailment. Once we know that all humans are mortal and that Socrates is human, those facts entail that Socrates is mortal. Deduction begins with the general, in this case what we know about human mortality, and reasons down to the specific, Socrates in particular. What's great about deductive arguments is that the truth of the premises must lead to the truth of the conclusion. When this happens, we say that the argument is valid. There's no way for the conclusion to be false if the premises are true. Now check out this argument. All humans are mortal, Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates was Plato's teacher. That argument is invalid because nothing about human mortality can prove that Socrates was Plato's teacher. As you might have noticed, there are plenty of mortal humans who never taught Plato. What's interesting though is that this argument does happen to have a true conclusion, which leads us to another issue, and that is validity is not the same as truth. All valid really means is that if the premises are true, then your conclusion can't be false. But that doesn't mean that your premises prove your conclusion to be correct. Like in the case of whether Socrates was Plato's teacher, the premises are true and the conclusion is true, but the argument is still not valid because the premises don't in any way prove the conclusion. It just happens to be true. So if your premises don't guarantee the truth of your conclusion, then you can end up with some really crappy arguments, like this one. All cats are mammals. I'm a mammal, therefore I'm a cat. As much as part of me would like to be my cat, this is invalid because the conclusion doesn't entail from the premises at all. I mean, all cats are mammals, but all mammals aren't cats, which means there are such things as non-cat mammals, which I am just one example of. And it probably goes without saying, but you can have a perfectly valid argument and still have a false conclusion if any of your premises are false. For example, all humans have tails, my brother John is a human, therefore John Green has a tail. The argument is totally valid because the premises entail the conclusion. The reasoning totally stands up. It's just that one of the premises is flawed. Since I'm reasonably certain that John doesn't have a tail, I've seen him in a bathing suit, this argument is not deductively sound. And a deductively sound argument is one that's free of formal flaws or defects. It's an argument whose premises are all true, and that's valid, which means its conclusion is guaranteed to be true. So, sound arguments should always be your goal. The reason that deduction is prized by philosophers and lots of other important kinds of thinkers is that it's the only kind of argument that can give you a real certainty. But it's limited, because it only works if you're starting with known true premises, which are hard to come by. And for what it's worth, deductive truths are usually pretty obvious. They don't tend to lead us to startling new information, like the fact that I'm not a cat or that John doesn't have a tail. So instead of starting with premises that are already certain, like deduction does, you're gonna have to know how to determine the truth of and your confidence in your premises. Which means you're gonna have to acquaint yourself with the other species of arguments, which we're gonna do next time. But today we talked about the value of reason, the structure of arguments, and we took a close look at one kind of argument, deductive reasoning. This episode of Crash Course.
So, the important in this slide, in this video, is just you need to have a good argument, And he was talking about you as, or Plato was saying about the soul as tripartite soul, which is three types. The rational and spiritual, emotional, and appetitive or physical desire is actually modified by Freud to be like a super ego, an ego, and id. The super ego, your love to be humane and help others, and go out of your way to be generous and donate. The ego is the rational side of you to act properly in between people. And the id, when you only respond to your own desires, which is obviously, this is their understanding to the soul. While in Islam, Allah Azza wa Jal told us you have a soul. The spirits come to you from Allah Azza wa Jal when you are 120 days fetus in the tummy of your mom. And the Quran divided the spirits into, or the soul into 7 types. And you progress from 1 to 1 to 1. You are, at the beginning, your spirit might be ruled by your own love to worldly things and desires and probably bad things. And Allah called it an-nafs al-ammara bis-su', the soul which order you to do bad things. And that's mentioned by Zaliha, the wife of the master, the treasurer of Egypt, in the nafs al-ammara bis-su'. And this could be an envy type of soul, or a sinner soul, or unjust soul. So that's a bit of subdivision to the nafs al-ammara bis-su'. You progress, you start feeling guilty about things wrong you do, and that's called the nafs al-lawwama. So nafs al-lawwama is, this is what mentioned in the Quran. لا أقسم بيوم القيامة ولا أقسم بالنفس اللوامة. You do something right, you do something wrong, you regret doing it, you try to repair yourself and correct yourself. You progress in Islam as spiritually, and you become an-nafs al-mulhama, and you will be inspired by Allah Azza wa Jal to do good things. Allah Azza wa Jal, there is a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, the shaitan has a lumma, and the angel have a lumma. And you follow, the shaitan bring an idea to you, and the devil and the angel bring a good idea to you, and you follow the one which you choose. So you become like you are, you come up, a chair here, sister, at the very front here. And there's 2 in the back there. So you develop to become helped by Allah Azza wa Jal when you are asking for help. The shaitan will bring the bad idea. If you follow the shaitanic idea, you go back to nafs al-ammara bis-su', you start doing wrong things. And then you progress as a soul, spiritually, closer to Allah Azza wa Jal, and you become an-nafs al-muzakka. وَنَفْسٌ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. So you purify your soul continuously, you get closer to Allah, you do the right things, you go do things which please Allah Azza wa Jal, help the community, help everybody around. So that's purified soul. When you become purified soul, you move into the nafs al-mutma'inna. You're happy, satisfied with Allah give you. You're really quite close to Allah. You don't care about whatever you lost, whatever you gain. You're quite satisfied. You reach the top maximum tranquility a man could reach. Nafs al-mutma'inna. At that time, when you go to the time of death, Allah will call this nafs al-mutma'inna. Ya ayyatuha an-nafs al-mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki. Go back to your Lord. Radiyatan, you've been accepted, you've been well pleased, and mardiya, you have been accepted by Allah. So it's the soul is not 3 parts or 5 parts. It's one soul, and you control it. And you could be nafs al-ammara bis-su', doing the bad things, ordering bad things, or you could be an-nafs al-lawwama, you start correcting yourself, blaming yourself for the wrong things you've done, and then you become an-nafs al-mulhama. You start getting the ideas from the Quran, from the Sunnah, from the good people, listening. Shaitan bring a bad idea, push it away, and you become a nafs al-muzakkiya. You purified yourself, and then you move into the nafs al-mutma'inna. You should always aim to reach the mutma'inna, because that's when the angel come to take your soul when you die. You should be at that level, al-nafs al-mutma'inna. Now, the question he mentioned about the barber shop, logically, people have to be from the same group. You must be included in the group. You cannot talk and you are outside the group. I'm part of you, I'm part of the community, I'm thinking like them. And he mentioned the type of arguments, which is deductive argument. You have a reason, a reason, a reason, therefore this is the conclusion. And then he will talk about the inductive argument, which is that you used aspirin before and cured your headache, or paracetamol, it's more likely it will cure your headache again. And therefore you take aspirin. Or abductive argument, when you come to make an evidence of something, and he say that because of A, B, and C, this is my conclusion. And he brought, he spoke about the deductive argument about Socrates. All human are mortal. Socrates is human. Socrates is mortal. And when you say about all human are mortal, Socrates is a human. Socrates was Plato's teacher. It's the wrong conclusion. Nothing to do with being human or mortal. And when you come in another invalid argument, he said, all cats are mammals. I am a cat, so I am a mammal, so I'm a cat. But the first one, not all mammals are cats. So the first reason was wrong. You cannot get the conclusion. So when you talk to people, you have to get the first argument, the first reason correct, the second reason correct, the third reason correct, before you get to the conclusion. If you come and give invalid reason, people will not listen. They need to say why. I'm not coming out of the house today because there's extreme rain, my car is not working, I am ill, or whatever. But if you give a silly reason why you're not coming out of the home, they know you mean something else. There's something else stopping you. Valid argument could be because the reasons sound all right, all human have tails. But that's, people will come back to you and say, no, not all human have tails. Probably you have one, but not all human. So that the argument is different type. And I will show you, I thought I will skip that. I'll show you this, and then we'll go to, inshallah, to go to the Zuhr prayer.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
How do you know that aspirin will take care of your headache? Why do you really want to see that new Marvel movie, even though you haven't heard anything about it, good or bad? Your ability to do things like predict how a medication will affect you, or what movie you might like, or even things like what the perfect gift might be for your best friend, or what's the fastest way to get to campus. All of this stuff you know through induction. Deductive arguments are great because they give us certain answers. But unfortunately, much of the world cannot be summed up in a neat deductive proof. Deduction requires a fair amount of general information to give you a specific conclusion that is, frankly, probably kind of obvious. So philosophy, and basically, life as well, require that you have other ways of reasoning. In addition to knowing how one fact leads to another, you also need to take what you've experienced before and use that to predict what might happen in the future. And you need to be able to rule out what can't be true so you can focus on what can. Through these kinds of reasoning, you're not only able to figure out stuff like how to fix your headache and why your roommate might be acting weird, you can also come up with better, more skillful arguments and counter-arguments, which are some of the most important maneuvers in the philosophical game. And maybe the best part is, you already know how to use these techniques. In fact, I bet you've used them this very day. You know this. If you possess any ability to really predict the future, it lies in your ability to reason inductively. Inductive reasoning relies on the predictability of nature to reveal that the future is likely to resemble the past, often in important ways. For example, there's tons of research to support the knowledge that aspirin, acetylsalicylic acid, is an effective treatment for pain, like headaches. And you probably have personal experience with the effects of aspirin too. So you believe that this aspirin tablet will cure the headache you have right now because countless aspirin tablets have cured countless headaches in the past. Likewise, you want to see the new Marvel movie because you liked most of the other ones, so you believe that they'll continue to deliver for you entertainment-wise. But it's important to remember that unlike deduction, where true premises entail true conclusions, inductive premises only mean that the conclusion is likely to be true. Inductive arguments don't provide you with certainty. Instead, they work in terms of probabilities. And they're useful for more than just predicting what's going to happen. For example, most men in ancient Athens had beards. Socrates was a man who lived in ancient Athens. Therefore, Socrates probably had a beard. This is an inductive argument because it starts with what we already know about the grooming habits of ancient Athenian men and about the time and place in which Socrates lived, and makes an educated guess based on that information. There's no guarantee that the conclusion is correct, but what's known would seem to support it. Reasoning like this is incredibly useful, which is why it's so common, but there's also a problem. The future doesn't always resemble the past, and every pattern has its outliers. So induction always has the potential to produce false results. Aspirin might not work on a really bad headache, the new Marvel movie might be awful, and yeah, maybe a specific guy in Athens had a beard, but it's possible he didn't. While the world tends to work according to predictable rules, sometimes those rules are violated. And you know what you need when that happens? A little flash philosophy. Off to the thought bubble. Contemporary American philosopher Nelson Goodman confronts the problems with induction using a thought exercise about a hypothetical substance given the evidence. Is a thought process sometimes described as inference to the best explanation. Abduction doesn't reason straight from a premise to a conclusion, as we've seen in deduction and induction. Instead, it reasons by ruling out possible explanations until you're left with the most plausible one given the evidence. Consider this. Anna told you she failed her physics midterm. Anna hasn't been in physics class since your teacher graded the exams. Anna has been in sociology class, which meets right after physics. Anna dropped physics. Now, with only these premises, we can't deductively or inductively prove our conclusion, that she dropped physics. But it's a justifiable conclusion because given what we know, dropping the class is the most plausible explanation of events. We know she's not sick because she's still going to sociology, and we know she had a good reason to withdraw from the class because she was unlikely to pass. Concluding that she dropped the course makes the most tidy use of our information without leaving any loose ends. So let's look at another one. You and your roommate ate sushi last night. You both wake up with violent stomach aches. You and your roommate ate some bad sushi. The mere fact that you're both sick doesn't prove that the sushi caused the sickness, but given that you both ate the same thing and you both have the same symptoms, absent other information like that a stomach virus is going around your dorm, the best explanation is that the sushi caused your intestinal anguish. Now, like induction, abduction doesn't give us certainty, but it is a really useful way to get through puzzling situations when you don't have clear evidence from the past to help you out. Doctors use abduction a lot when they're diagnosing illnesses, and detectives, of course, use it when piecing together evidence. You probably use it pretty often too. Just beware, because abduction must be used carefully. It uses only information you have at hand. That's why doctors and detectives work so hard to dig up more data and recreate events from the past so they can help draw better conclusions. Alright, now that we've looked at some argument types, let's find out how